Welcome back to Smile and Scars, the channel where we bring you real, life action, packed stories, unbelievable feats, and moments where courage and justice collide. Today, we have an extraordinary story that took place in a setting where law and authority were supposed to prevail, but arrogance and ignorance led to instant regret. This is the tale of a cop who kicked Steven Seagal in the face, not knowing the consequences that were about to unfold. It was a late afternoon in a small town, and the police station was unusually crowded. Steven Seagal had been called to assist with a minor investigation, a robbery report that required his expertise in martial arts and security consultation. The officers in charge were tense, the air thick with humidity and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Some officers were aware of Seagal's reputation, but others dismissed it as just hype, assuming he was merely a celebrity. Seagal walked into the station quietly, dressed casually but exuding an aura of controlled power. His presence was noticeable immediately. The chatter in the room quieted down subtly as his calm but commanding demeanor drew attention. A few officers exchanged nervous glances, uncertain if they should acknowledge the man whose reputation preceded him. Among the officers was one particularly arrogant cop, known for his short temper and need to assert dominance over anyone he perceived as a threat. The moment he saw Seagal, his ego took over. "So this is the guy everyone talks about," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see if he's really as tough as people say." Seagal, as usual, did not respond. He moved through the room with measured steps, surveying the environment with sharp, practiced eyes. His calm contrasted sharply with the growing agitation of the cop who had decided to provoke him. Without warning, the arrogant officer took a reckless step forward and delivered a kick to Seagal's face. It was a poorly thought-out move, driven entirely by ego and ignorance. The courtroom, the station, or the onlookers didn't have time to react before Seagal's body responded with lightning speed. The first instant after the kick was critical. Seagal, trained in martial arts and aware of his own strength, shifted his weight effortlessly. The force of the kick was redirected using a precise motion, causing the officer to lose balance and stumble backward. His eyes widened as he realized immediately that he had misjudged the man before him. Seagal's voice, calm but icy, cut through the sudden tension. "You should think before you act," he said softly. Every word carried weight, the kind that commands attention without raising volume. The room went silent. Even the officers who had not witnessed the kick paused, sensing that the situation had escalated far beyond ordinary confrontation. The arrogant officer attempted to regain his composure, puffing up his chest as if to assert authority. I don't know what came over me," he stammered, sweat forming on his brow. But Seagal's eyes did not waver. They were focused, intense, and unyielding. Seagal took a deliberate step forward, closing the gap between them in a manner that made the officer instinctively recoil. He didn't raise his hands aggressively, but his posture alone projected lethal precision. "Regret doesn't come from luck," Seagal said. "It comes from learning the hard way." The officer, now visibly shaking, tried another move. He swung a punch in a clumsy arc, thinking speed could compensate for skill. Seagal, anticipating every motion, sidestepped with fluid grace, grabbed the officer's wrist, and applied a joint lock. The cop cried out in pain, struggling futilely as his own momentum worked against him. Other officers began to react, some moving closer to help, others freezing in disbelief. None of them expected the swift, controlled, and devastating response that Seagal delivered. Every muscle movement was precise, calculated, and utterly effective. Seagal released the joint lock after a moment, letting the officer stagger to the floor, trembling and pale. "Remember this feeling," Seagal said quietly, his voice calm yet full of authority. "It's called respect, and it comes from understanding your mistakes before it's too late." The scene drew murmurs from bystanders and fellow officers alike. They had seen bravado in many forms, but nothing like this. The arrogance that had fueled the cop's initial attack was replaced entirely by fear and humiliation. Seagal didn't stop there. He knew that in situations like these, leaving a lesson incomplete could invite further recklessness. He moved toward the remaining officers, who were now hesitant, unsure whether to confront him or step aside. His presence alone commanded obedience. "You," Seagal said, pointing to the officer who had attempted to intervene, "stay where you are. Every action has a consequence. Every aggressive move without thought ends badly. Remember that, or you will learn it the hard way again." The officer froze, fully understanding the truth of Seagal's words. He had been reckless, and the cost had been immediate and painful. This wasn't just a scolding. It was a demonstration of skill, discipline, and the consequences of underestimating someone with decades of martial arts mastery. Seagal paused and took a moment to scan the room. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone unnecessarily," he said, "but I will not tolerate unnecessary aggression. Consider this a warning, one that could have been avoided." At this point, even the chief officer present intervened. "Mr. Seagal, let's calm down," he said, trying to reassert order, but the tension remained. The officers involved were now pale, shaken, and fully aware that they had challenged someone beyond their understanding. Seagal nodded to the chief, acknowledging the attempt at diplomacy, but his attention remained on the arrogant cop. "Let this be a reminder to everyone," he said softly. "Respect is earned, arrogance is dangerous, and mistakes can be costly." The room, once buzzing with tension and whispers of disbelief, gradually quieted. Spectators and fellow officers began to process what had just occurred. The lesson was clear. Underestimating Steven Seagal, even in a casual or official setting, was not just unwise, it was dangerous. As Seagal prepared to leave the station, he cast one final glance at the officers who had challenged him. Their faces were still pale, eyes wide with understanding. They had received their lesson, immediate and unforgettable. The arrogance that had filled the room earlier had dissipated entirely, replaced by a profound respect for the man who had demonstrated both skill and authority without unnecessary violence. By the time Seagal walked out into the evening light, the story of what had just occurred began to spread through whispers and conversations. Even those who had not witnessed the scene firsthand would soon hear tales of the officer who kicked Steven Seagal and regretted it within seconds. An unforgettable lesson in humility, respect, and the power of martial arts mastery. The evening air outside the station was cool, carrying a hint of rain that had yet to fall. Steven Seagal walked calmly down the steps, the weight of authority and skill evident in every measured step. Behind him, the officers he had just humbled remained inside, still processing the events that had unfolded. Their faces were pale, some with sweat trickling down their foreheads, others simply staring blankly at the floor. None dared move or speak, for they had realized that arrogance had nearly cost them far more than humiliation. It could have led to serious injury. Seagal paused for a moment, taking in the quiet of the evening. The incident inside the station had sent ripples through the small town. Word would spread quickly, and the lesson learned by the reckless officer would not be forgotten. As he moved toward his car, he reflected on the importance of restraint, discipline, and the principle that true strength is not in provoking fear, but in teaching respect. Inside the station, the officers began to regroup, though uneasily. The lead officer, who had initially challenged Seagal, tried to collect himself. His hands trembled slightly as he wiped sweat from his brow. "That was not what I expected," he muttered to a colleague, his voice barely audible. "I thought he was just a celebrity, nothing more. I was wrong, very wrong." His colleague nodded, still staring at the empty space where Seagal had been standing moments ago. "We underestimated him," he said quietly. "Completely underestimated him." The lead officer sank into a chair, his face still pale. He couldn't shake the image of Seagal's calm, precise movements, each action deliberate and flawlessly executed. It was a humbling moment that would stay with him forever. Meanwhile, Seagal arrived home, greeted by his family. The calm and warmth of home provided a stark contrast to the tension and chaos he had left behind. Yet even here his mind remained sharp, alert to any potential threats or disturbances. His wife noticed his thoughtful expression and asked, "Everything okay?" Seagal smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and gravity in his eyes. Yes, everything is fine, but there are lessons that must be taught, and sometimes they must be learned the hard way. The story of the incident spread quickly through the town. Locals began to talk about the man who had entered a police station and emerged having taught a lesson that no amount of rank or authority could have prevented. The tale emphasized the importance of respect, discipline, and awareness. Even outside the immediate circle of those involved, the message was clear: underestimate Steven Seagal at your own peril. Back at the station, the officers continued their debrief. The department chief called a meeting to discuss the situation. "This is unprecedented," he said. "We must evaluate our protocols and ensure that incidents like this never escalate again. Our officers must understand the importance of respect and caution, especially when dealing with individuals of exceptional skill." The officers nodded, still visibly shaken. The arrogance and aggression that had prompted the initial attack had been replaced by an uneasy respect and, in some cases, fear. They had learned a lesson in humility, one that would not fade quickly. Meanwhile, Seagal, true to his philosophy, did not boast about the incident. He understood that true strength lay not in showcasing dominance unnecessarily, but in demonstrating that skill, composure, and moral authority could enforce justice. His restraint amplified the lesson. The officers had witnessed his full capability and understood the consequences of their actions without him needing to make threats or use excessive force. In the following days, the story became legendary in the town. People spoke of the officer who had kicked Steven Seagal in the face and instantly regretted it. They recounted the precision, calm, and authority with which Seagal had responded. It was no longer a story about bravado or celebrity. It was a story about justice, skill, and the importance of thinking before acting. The officer who had attacked Seagal found himself reflecting deeply on the incident. He replayed it repeatedly in his mind, recognizing his own flaws and the reckless decisions he had made. The fear he had felt in those crucial seconds had taught him more than any lecture or reprimand ever could. He began to train not in martial arts, but in discipline, control, and awareness. He knew he had been humbled in a way few people ever experienced, and he vowed never to repeat such a mistake. Seagal, on the other hand, continued his daily routine, quietly observing the world and intervening only when necessary. His life was a balance of vigilance and tranquility. He knew that the reputation he had built was not just about skill. It was about integrity, judgment, and the ability to act decisively when injustice arose. Weeks later, a news report surfaced about the incident. Local reporters spoke with witnesses and officers, emphasizing how a single act of arrogance had been met with a measured yet overwhelming response from a legendary martial artist. The story captured the public's imagination, highlighting the timeless lesson: never underestimate someone who has honed their skill, maintained discipline, and understands the consequences of aggression. The arrogant officer now approached his duties with caution and respect. Each time he recalled the moments inside the station, he remembered the lesson vividly. It had reshaped his perspective, reinforcing the idea that actions have consequences, and that authority must always be exercised with care. Seagal's intervention had not just resolved a single incident. It had created a ripple effect of awareness and respect throughout the department. Officers discussed the event as a cautionary tale, sharing the story with recruits and emphasizing the importance of discipline, patience, and humility. Even beyond the department, townspeople began to see the value of respect and the dangers of underestimating others. Seagal's calm but decisive actions became a symbol, a reminder that true strength is measured not in ego, but in the ability to act responsibly and justly. As time passed, the incident remained a pivotal moment in the lives of all involved. The officer who had made the fatal error grew into a more careful and measured professional, while Seagal continued to live as he always had, alert, disciplined, and ready to act when the situation demanded it. The story serves as a testament to the power of mastery, calm, and moral authority. It reminds us all that a moment of arrogance can lead to immediate and unforgettable consequences, especially when faced with someone who has trained their body, mind, and spirit to perfection. By the time the months rolled on, the story of that day, when a cop kicked Steven Seagal in the face and regretted it within seconds, had cemented itself as a legend. It was not about fear, fame, or dominance. It was about respect, skill, and the timeless principle that reckless aggression is always met with accountability. Seagal's reputation as a martial arts master and a figure of justice was reinforced, and those who had faced him never forgot the lesson. For the town, the department, and the individuals involved, it became a story of humility, awareness, and the power of controlled action. And so, in the end, what began as a reckless act inside a small police station transformed into a story that would be told for years, a story where arrogance met skill, aggression met precision, and instant regret became an unforgettable lesson.